Chapter 1. Salahaddin is worried. Salahaddin was sitting in his office with his coat off. It was the month of May in Cairo, and it was very hot. Salahaddin stood up and turned on the fan. He was a young man, only 28 years old. He was not very tall and quite thin. His black hair was cut very short. Salahaddin's office was in the center of Cairo. It was in a large building behind the Nile Hotel. It was a small office, and Salahaddin's name was not on the door. Not many people knew that he was a detective, but he was not an ordinary detective. Inspector Salahaddin protected all the antiquities of Egypt. Salahaddin was waiting for an archaeologist called Mr. Pearson. Pearson had been in Egypt for 6 months. He had been working in a valley in the south of Egypt. Pearson had been looking for antiquities. He had come back to Cairo a few days ago and was leaving Egypt soon. But Mr. Pearson had not come to Salahaddin's office. Every archaeologist had to see Salahaddin before they left Egypt. Salahaddin was worried. Pearson had not come yet. Salahaddin picked up the telephone and rang the number of Pearson's hotel. "Nile Hotel," said a voice. "Can I help you?" "Can I speak to the manager, please?" said Salahaddin. Salahaddin waited for a few moments. Then he heard the manager's voice. "Can I help you?" said the manager. "Yes," replied Salahaddin. "My name's Salahaddin E.I. Noor. I'm a police inspector. I want to speak to Mr. Pearson." "Do you mean Mr. Pearson, the archaeologist?" asked the manager. "Yes," replied Salahaddin. "I'm sorry. You can't speak to Mr. Pearson, sir," said the manager. "Oh," said Salahaddin in surprise. "Why not?" "Mr. Pearson is dead," replied the manager. "He was found dead in his room this morning. Mr. Pearson was murdered." Chapter 2. The Missing Box. Salahaddin put on his coat and quickly left his office. It was much hotter outside in the street. A hot, dusty wind was blowing between the tall buildings. Salahaddin jumped into a taxi. The streets were full of cars, and the taxi moved slowly. It took a long time to get to the Nile Hotel. A policeman was standing at the door of the hotel. "I'm sorry," said the policeman. "No one is allowed into the hotel." Salahaddin showed the policeman his identity card. The policeman took Salahaddin to his chief. Luckily, Salahaddin knew this officer. It was Inspector Ahmed, a school friend of Salahaddin's. Ahmed took Salahaddin upstairs to Pearson's room. Pearson was lying on the bed. There was a knife in his chest. "Why are you interested in this man?" Ahmed asked Salahaddin. "Do you know him?" "His name is Pearson," replied Salahaddin. "He's an archaeologist. He was working in the south. He was leaving Egypt soon, and I wanted to see him." "Why was he murdered?" Ahmed asked Salahaddin. "I don't know," replied Salahaddin. There were some boxes standing against the wall. Salahaddin pointed to them. "Perhaps there's something valuable in these boxes," said Salahaddin. "We must open them." Ahmed brought in 2 policemen and they started to open the boxes. Salahaddin looked carefully round the room. There were some papers on the table beside the bed. Salahaddin picked them up. There was a map under the papers. On the map were the words, "Valley of Zar." "These may be important," thought Salahaddin. "I'll take them with me and look at them later." Salahaddin folded the papers and the map and put them carefully in his wallet. By this time, the policeman had opened the boxes. There was nothing important in them. The boxes were full of spades and other things for digging. "There's nothing important or valuable in these boxes," said Salahaddin. "We must speak to all of the hotel staff. Perhaps one of them noticed something unusual." The manager brought the staff to Ahmed and Salahaddin. They asked each person many questions, but they did not learn anything important. Then Salahaddin had an idea. "Who carried these boxes to this room?" he asked the manager. The manager brought back 2 porters. "Did you carry these boxes into this room?" Salahaddin asked the porters. "Yes," they replied. "How many boxes were there?" asked Salahaddin. 6 boxes," replied the first porter. "I carried 3, and my friend carried 3. Salahaddin looked at the boxes. There were 6 of them. No one had taken a box. "Wait a moment," said the second porter. "You're wrong. There were 7 boxes. You carried 3, I carried 3. "But that makes 6 boxes, not 7, said Ahmed with a smile. "You can't count." "I can count," replied the porter. There were 7 boxes. Mr. Pearson carried one into the room himself. It was a heavy box, but it was smaller than the others. "That is the box which is missing," Salahaddin said to Ahmed. "There's something valuable in that 7th box. When we find the 7th box, we'll find the murderer." Chapter 3. The taxi driver Ahmed and Salahaddin left Pearson's room and went downstairs. They sat down and the manager brought them some coffee. "How can we find the 7th box?" asked Ahmed. "I need your help," replied Salahaddin. "How can I help you?" asked Ahmed. "The murderer took the box with him," said Salahaddin. "It was heavy and it's hot today. The murderer did not carry the box very far. Perhaps he took a taxi." "Perhaps he had his own car," said Ahmed. "We don't know," replied Salahaddin. "But perhaps he took a taxi." "That's possible," agreed Ahmed. "And you want to find that taxi. But how can I help you?" "You can send out a police message on Radio Cairo," replied Salahaddin. "That's true," agreed Ahmed. "What shall I say in the message?" "When did Pearson die?" asked Salahaddin. "About 10:30 this morning," replied Ahmed. "Then here's the message," said Salahaddin. "The police want to speak to a taxi driver. This taxi driver was near the Nile Hotel at about 11 o'clock this morning. A man got into his taxi. The man was carrying a heavy box. The police want to speak to the taxi driver as soon as possible." "Good," said Ahmed. "I'll put out this message immediately." "Most taxis have radios," said Salahaddin. "Perhaps a taxi driver will remember a man with a heavy box." "I'll get back to my office," went on Salahaddin. "When anything happens, let me know." "I'll telephone you immediately," replied Ahmed. It was now late afternoon. Outside on the street, it was still very hot. Salahaddin got into a taxi. Luckily, there were few cars and the streets were almost empty. He soon arrived back in his office. Salahaddin turned on the radio. He heard the message. It was repeated after 15 minutes. Salahaddin waited. Suddenly, the telephone rang. It was Ahmed. "We've been lucky," said Ahmed. A taxi driver is here in my office. A man with a heavy box got into his taxi near the Nile Hotel. At what time? Asked Salahaddin. At 11 o'clock this morning, replied Ahmed. Do you want to speak to him? Certainly, replied Salahaddin. I'll come round to your office immediately. Ahmed's office was quite near. Salahaddin walked there. The sun had gone down, and it was becoming cooler. The taxi driver was waiting in Ahmed's office. He was a fat, happy-looking man. He was also intelligent. Salahaddin took out his notebook and asked the taxi driver some questions. At what time did this man get into your taxi? Asked Salahaddin. A few minutes before 11 o'clock, replied the taxi driver. He got in quite near the Nile Hotel. Was he carrying anything? Salahaddin asked. Yes, replied the taxi driver. A heavy box. And what did he look like? Asked Salahaddin. He was tall with broad shoulders, replied the taxi driver. He had fair hair. He spoke Arabic, but he was not an Arab. Perhaps he was Swedish. Salahaddin thought for a few moments. Then he asked the taxi driver another question. This man spoke Arabic, did he? Asked Salahaddin. What kind of Arabic did he speak? What do you mean? Asked the driver. Did he speak Arabic like an Egyptian? Asked Salahaddin. Oh no, said the taxi driver. He spoke like a Lebanese. Where did you take this man? Said Salahaddin, continuing his questions. I took him to the railway station, replied the driver. He wanted to get there before 12 o'clock. 12 o'clock midday, said Salahaddin quietly. What train leaves Cairo at 12 o'clock? The express train for Alexandria, said the taxi driver immediately. I know all the trains. The express train leaves Cairo at 12 o'clock and arrives in Alexandria at 2:30. Salahaddin had been lucky. He had found out some important facts. He looked at the notes in his book. Pearson's murderer? X? What does he look like? Tall and broad fair hair. Perhaps X is Swedish. Where is X going? Went to Cairo railway station before 12 o'clock. Perhaps X is going to Alexandria. Why Alexandria? Alexandria, Beirut? Many ships go from Alexandria to Beirut easy to get a heavy box on a boat, not so easy to get a box on aeroplane. Remember, X speaks Arabic like a Lebanese. Perhaps X is going to take a boat to Beirut? Chapter 4. Boat to Beirut. It was now after 7 o'clock in the evening. The train from Cairo had arrived at Alexandria at 2:30. Perhaps Pearson's murderer was already on a boat to Beirut. We must phone Alexandria, said Salahaddin to Ahmed. Salahaddin picked up the telephone. He asked for the police at the docks in Alexandria. After about 10 minutes, the telephone rang. It was the call to Alexandria. This is Salahaddin E.I. Noor speaking. I'm a police inspector and I want to speak to your chief. The chief of the dock police came to the telephone. Salahaddin asked some questions and wrote the answers down in his notebook. Here are his notes. A tall man with fair hair arrived at the docks at 6 o'clock. Man was carrying a heavy box. He had a Swedish passport. All the papers already sent to Cairo. Man said the box was full of books. Box was not opened. Police do not open every box. 2 boats had left Alexandria after 4:30 p.m. A boat left at 6:30 for Beirut. Its name, Syria. Man said he was going to Beirut. The police did not see him getting on the boat for Beirut. Salahaddin put down the telephone and looked at his notes for some time. Then he spoke to Ahmed. Pearson's murderer has gone to Beirut, he said. I'm sure of that. Then we can send a message to the boat, said Ahmed. No, we won't do that, said Salahaddin. We're not really certain. Many men have fair hair and many men carry heavy boxes. I must meet him. I must speak to him. But how can you do that? Asked Ahmed. It's too late now. The boat has already left. I can get to Beirut before him, replied Salahaddin. Today is Monday. The boat won't be in Beirut until tomorrow evening. I can take an aeroplane. And the plane takes only 2 hours, said Ahmed. That's right, said Salahaddin. I'll take a plane tomorrow morning and I'll be in Beirut before midday. That's a good idea, said Ahmed. You can meet this man on the docks at Beirut. And now I must go. I've a lot to do, said Salahaddin. I must book a seat on the aeroplane and get a ticket. I'll see you later. Thanks for your help. Goodbye. Chapter 5. The Black Cat. Salahaddin got home very late. It was nearly midnight and he was very tired. But his work was not yet finished. He took some pieces of paper out of his wallet. They were the pieces of paper from Pearson's room. Salahaddin sat down and looked at Pearson's notes. The pharaoh Ankuten. This pharaoh did not live long. He died when he was still a boy. Where was Ankuten buried? Ankuten was going to the Sudan when he did it. The Valley of Zar is beside the road to the Sudan. Was Ankuten buried in the Valley of Zar? What was buried with Ankuten in his tomb? Was there a cat buried with Ankuten? There are many old stories about a black cat. Ankuten loved black cats. When he died, a black cat was put in his tomb. But this cat was very unusual. It was made of gold. Its eyes were diamonds. There was a collar of diamonds round its neck. Is this story true or not? Why was the cat covered with black paint? Fear of robbers. Black paint hid the gold and diamonds. A cat painted in thick black paint did not look valuable. Questions that must be answered. Is Ankuten buried in the Valley of Zar? Is there a black cat in his tomb? Is the black cat made of gold? Or is it made of wood? Are the stories true or false? Salahaddin read the notes again. He asked himself some questions. Did Pearson find the tomb of Ankuten, he asked himself. Did he find a black cat? And is the black cat made of gold? There was a reason for Pearson's death. Was the black cat the reason? There are too many questions, thought Salahaddin. I must find some answers. The answers are in the missing box and it's probably on its way to Beirut. I'll be there tomorrow. Chapter 6. In Beirut. At 10:30 the next morning, Salahaddin arrived at Beirut Airport. The airport lies to the south of the city, and the docks are in the north. One road from the airport to the docks goes through the center of the city. Another road goes beside the sea. Salahaddin got into a taxi. He told the driver to take the road beside the sea. The sun was shining on the city, and there was a mist on the hills behind. The air was fresh and cool. Saladin felt very happy in Beirut. It was nice and cool after the heat and dust of Cairo. When he got to the docks, he asked about the boat from Alexandria. The Sudan did not arrive at Beirut until 6:30 in the evening. Saladin had more than 6 hours to wait. He decided to visit a friend called Fuad. Fuad had been a student with Saladin at Cairo University. He now worked in the Lebanese Department of Antiquities in Beirut. His office was in a large museum in the northeast part of the city. Saladin took a taxi to the museum. Fuad was surprised and pleased to see him. "We'll have lunch together," said Fuad. "I'll phone my wife immediately." 10 minutes later, they were in Fuad's car. Fuad lived in a small village in the mountains above Beirut. The road was very steep. It twisted and turned up the mountain. "This road is dangerous," said Saladin. "You're right," replied Fuad, "and it's more dangerous higher up. People are often killed up there." But it was also very beautiful. It was spring, and the trees and the flowers were fresh and green. Some people were already selling fruit beside the road. They had large baskets of strawberries. The car soon arrived at Fuad's house. Fuad's wife, Layla, was waiting for them. "Hello, Saladin," said Layla. "It's nice to see you again. We've a lot to talk about. But first, we'll have lunch." After lunch, they sat out on the veranda and drank coffee. They talked about Cairo and their friends there. From the veranda, they looked down towards the tall buildings of Beirut. Behind the buildings were the docks and the sea. "Now," said Fuad, "why are you in Beirut?" Saladin told Fuad about the death of Pearson. He told him also about the man with fair hair. "I want to be at the docks at 6 o'clock, said Saladin. "I'm going to meet the Sudan. It arrives at 6:30. "I'll take you there in my car," said Fuad. They sat on the veranda and talked together. The time passed quickly, and soon they had to leave for the docks. "Bring Saladin back here," Layla said to Fuad. "Our house is more comfortable than a hotel. He must stay here tonight." Saladin thanked Layla and stood up. "It's getting cold," he said. "Yes," replied Fuad. "You're wearing summer clothes. This is not Cairo. It's cold here in the mountains. It's cold sometimes even in summer. I'll get you a warm coat. You'll need it later." At 5 o'clock, Saladin and Fuad left the house. They said goodbye to Layla and drove down the steep road towards Beirut. Chapter 7. The Road to Baalbek. At 6 o'clock, Saladin and Fuad arrived at the docks in Beirut. They sat in the car and waited for the arrival of the Sudan. There was another car on the docks. "Do you see that black car over there?" asked Fuad. "The one with 2 men in the front?" "Yes," said Fuad. "And there's a fat man sitting in the back seat. I know him. He's interested in antiquities. He often comes to the museum." The Sudan soon appeared at the entrance to the docks. It reached the dockside just after 6:30, and the passengers came down the gangway. "There he is," said Saladin. "The man on the gangway. He's tall. He has fair hair and broad shoulders. That's the man." "But I know him," said Fuad. "He's a Swede and his name is Barkman. He's interested in antiquities, too. I've often seen him in the museum." "Where's the box?" asked Salahaddin. "He's not carrying a box." "Let's wait and see," said Fuad. "Perhaps he's given the box to a porter." "Look," said Salahaddin. "The black car is moving." The black car moved a few meters and stopped again behind a shed. Fuad and Salahaddin sat and waited. Barkman got off the boat and got into a taxi, but he was not carrying a heavy box. The taxi started to move away. "Let's follow him," said Fuad. "Wait a moment," said Salahaddin. "Watch the black car." Salahaddin was right. The black car pulled out slowly and followed Barkman's taxi. "We can go now," said Salahaddin. "We'll follow the black car. There's something strange here." The 3 cars drove out of the docks, one after the other. The taxi went quickly through the streets of Beirut. Then it started to climb the steep road towards the mountains. The black car followed the taxi. Fuad followed the black car. "Isn't this the road to your village?" asked Salahaddin. "Yes," replied Fuad. "This road goes higher up the mountains. It goes to a small town called Baalbek." "I've heard of Baalbek," said Salahaddin. "There are some famous ruins there." "And there's a gang of smugglers, too," said Fuad. "They smuggle antiquities out of Beirut." The 3 cars drove up the steep road. They went past Fuad's village. Fuad drove on in silence. The road became narrower and steeper, and Fuad did not drive too close to the black car. "The road's more dangerous here," said Fuad. "There was an accident a few weeks ago. 4 people were killed." For a few moments, nothing happened. Then the black car began to go faster. It had moved into the middle of the road and was trying to pass Barkman's taxi. The 2 cars were now side by side. They were almost touching each other. There was a sharp bend in the road in front of them. "They'll never get round that bend," shouted Fuad. But it was already too late. There was a loud crashing noise. Fuad slowed down and drove carefully round the bend. The black car and the taxi had disappeared. In front of them, the road was empty. Everything was silent. Chapter 8: Barkman's Story. Fuad and Salahaddin got out of the car and walked to the edge of the road. It was now getting dark and cold. The 2 cars lay below them. The black car had fallen about 200 meters to the bottom. It was on fire. The taxi had not fallen so far. It was lying against a tree. "Come on," said Salahaddin. "Let's climb down quickly. Perhaps Barkman's still alive." Fuad climbed down the steep path and Salahaddin followed him. They found the taxi. The driver was inside, but he was dead. One of the doors was open and Barkman had fallen out onto some bushes. He was not dead, but he was badly injured. Fuad bent down and lifted the dying man. He laid him on a flat piece of ground. After a few moments, Barkman opened his eyes and looked up. He tried to speak, but he did not speak very clearly. "The men in the black car," he said. "Where are they? What happened to them?" "They're dead," replied Salahaddin quietly. "But who are you?" asked Barkman. "We were passing on the road," replied Fuad. "We saw the accident." There was silence for a few moments. Barkman closed his eyes and lay still on the ground. Then he slowly opened his eyes again. "Will you help me?" he asked. Yes, replied Fuad. What do you want? Go to Baalbek, said Barkman. Go to Yusuf's cafe. Ask for Yusuf. Tell Yusuf. Barkman was silent again. What do I tell Yusuf? Asked Fuad. Tell him that Pearson's dead, said Barkman, and the black cat's safe. Where is the black cat? Asked Salahuddin. Tell Yusuf that the black cat's safe, said Barkman again. But where is it? Asked Salahuddin again. Pearson has the black cat, said Barkman after a few moments. I gave it to him at Alexandria. He took it with him on the boat. Which boat? Asked Salahuddin. The boat to Athens, replied Barkman. Pearson took the black cat on the boat to Athens. Who was following you then? Asked Fuad. The Red Hand Gang. Chapter 9. Beirut to Athens. Fuad phoned the airport. Layla brought in some coffee and they sat down. Salahuddin told her about Barkman's death. He spoke about the black cat. But what is the black cat? Asked Layla. Salahuddin told her about the pharaoh Ankheten and about the tomb in the Valley of Zar. I know now that Pearson found the tomb, said Salahuddin. He found the cat in the tomb and brought it to Cairo. Pearson told Barkman about the cat, but Barkman was a member of the Baalbek gang. Pearson didn't know that. Barkman murdered Pearson and took the cat. And where is the cat now? Asked Layla. Barkman had a plan, replied Salahuddin. He was not taking the cat to Beirut. He gave the cat to another man on the docks at Alexandria. This other man is called Pearson. Pearson has taken the black cat with him to Athens. While Salahuddin was talking, he was making some notes in his book. This is what he wrote. Pearson found black cat, took it to Cairo, told Barkman. Pearson murdered by Barkman. Barkman took black cat to Alexandria, gave it to Pearson, came to Beirut, killed en road to Baalbek. The Red Hang Gang heard about black cat, tried to stop Barkman, killed en road to Baalbek. Yusuf in cafe at Baalbek. Leader of Baalbek. Gang, Pearson has black cat, is on a boat going to Athens. Boat is called the Syria. Fuad came back from the telephone. There's a plane in 4 hours' time, he said. It leaves Beirut at 1 o'clock in the morning and arrives in Athens at 5. How long does the boat take from Alexandria to Athens? Asked Salahuddin. Almost 2 days, replied Layla. I once went by boat on a holiday to Athens. The Syria left Alexandria on Monday evening, said Salahuddin. It's Tuesday today. It won't arrive in Athens until tomorrow. I'll be in Athens before the boat. We must leave soon, said Fuad. It's a long way to the airport. Salahuddin said goodbye to Layla and drove off with Fuad. They arrived at the airport just after midnight. It was already Wednesday. But Salahuddin was only a few hours away from Athens by air. Salahuddin thanked Fuad. Take care, said Fuad. 6 people have already died because of this black cat. Send us a telegram from Athens. I'll send you a telegram from Athens tomorrow, said Salahuddin. Then he smiled. I mean today. It's Wednesday already. You go to the police in the morning, tell them about Yusuf's cafe. Salahuddin said goodbye to Fuad and went to catch the plane for Athens. Chapter 10. Salahaddin finds Pearson. Salahaddin's plane flew over Athens early in the morning. From the aeroplane, he looked down on the ruins of the Acropolis. They looked wonderful in the early morning sunlight. But Salahaddin was not a tourist. He was a detective, and he had to find Pearson. Salahaddin took a taxi from the airport to Piraeus, the seaport of Athens. He got out of the taxi at Piraeus and went to an office at the dock gate. "What time does the Syria arrive from Alexandria?" he asked. "At midday," was the reply. "And it leaves again for Venice at 4 o'clock. It was only 6 o'clock in the morning. Salahaddin had a long time to wait. But Piraeus is full of small cafes and restaurants. Salahaddin passed the time drinking coffee and sleeping. At 11 o'clock, Salahaddin walked back to the docks. He tried to walk through the gate, but a policeman stopped him. "You can't go through the gate without a ticket," said the policeman. Salahaddin had an idea. The man in the office had said that the Syria was going to Venice. Salahaddin went back to the office and bought a first-class ticket to Venice. When he got into the docks, the Syria had not yet arrived. Salahaddin sat down on a box and waited. "Pearson is not an Egyptian name," thought Salahaddin. "It's another Swedish name like Barkman. Perhaps Pearson is Swedish also. I'll look for a man with fair hair. He'll be carrying a box." The Syria was half an hour late. It arrived in the docks at 12:30. Salahaddin watched the people getting off the boat. They were all Egyptian. There were some men with their wives and children, and many students. There was no one who looked Swedish. At that moment, someone appeared on the top deck of the Syria. He was a tall man with fair hair. "That's Pearson," thought Salahaddin. "So he's decided to stay on the boat. Perhaps he's going to Venice. I'll get on the boat and go to Venice too." But Salahaddin was careful. Perhaps it was a trick and Pearson was going to get off the boat at the last moment. Salahaddin waited, but no one else got off. At 5 o'clock, Salahaddin got on the boat. The gangway was taken down and the Syria was ready to leave. Salahaddin went to the ticket office on the boat and showed his ticket to the officer. "I've just got on the boat," said Salahaddin. "Can I have a cabin, please?" "You're traveling first class, sir," the officer said. "You can go into cabin 22. It's just under the top deck." The officer turned to get the key for cabin 22. "Wait a moment, sir," said the officer. "I'm sorry. I've made a mistake. Cabin 22 isn't empty. Mr. Pearson's in cabin 22. He's decided to go on to Venice. But cabin 23 is empty. You can go there." Salahaddin took the key from the officer, went to cabin 23 and sat down. He had found Pearson. Chapter 11. Salahaddin finds the black cat. 10 minutes later, there was a knock at the door of Salahaddin's cabin. It was the steward. "Do you want to eat in the dining room or in your cabin, sir?" asked the steward. "Where do people usually eat?" asked Salahaddin. "In the dining room," replied the steward. "But you can have your dinner in your cabin if you want." "That's an idea," said Salahaddin. "I'll eat here." "I'll bring you dinner at 8 o'clock then," said the steward, and walked down the corridor. Salahaddin watched the steward carefully. The steward walked to a small room under the stairs. Saladin took out his notebook and drew a plan of the corridor and the cabins. Here is the plan. After a few moments, the steward came out of his room and walked down the corridor. Saladin waited for 5 minutes. Everything was quiet in the corridor. Saladin left his cabin and walked quietly to the steward's room under the stairs. The steward had not locked the door. Saladin opened it carefully and looked in. The room was small, with brushes and cleaning things in it. There were some hooks on the wall. A key hung from every hook, and there was a number above each one. Saladin took the key of cabin 22 and went to the door. Suddenly, he heard a noise. Pearson had come back. He was standing at the door of his cabin. Saladin waited in the steward's room. Pearson went into his cabin and closed the door. Saladin quietly went back to his own cabin, sat down and listened. There was the noise of music. Pearson had turned on a radio. Then there was the noise of running water. Pearson was having a shower. Saladin had a shower too, got dressed and waited. A few minutes later, there was a knock at his door. The steward had brought Saladin's dinner. At the same time, Pearson came out of his cabin. He locked the door and walked down the corridor. Pearson was going to the dining room. The steward went away, and Saladin was left alone. He looked out into the corridor. Everything was quiet. Saladin left his cabin and crossed the corridor. He put the key in the lock of cabin 22 and quietly opened the door. Then he went into the cabin and shut the door carefully behind him. Saladin looked round the cabin. There was a case on top of the cupboard and some clothes on the bed. But he did not see a box. He looked inside the shower room. It was empty. The black cat must be here, thought Saladin. Where has he hidden it? Then he had an idea. The shower room was very high. Saladin looked up. There was a box placed above the shower. Saladin lifted the box down on the bed and started to open it. But something had gone wrong. There was a noise, and the door of cabin 22 suddenly opened. There was a man in the doorway. It was Pearson, and he had a gun in his hand. The gun was pointing at Saladin. Chapter 12. Death on the Syria. "Don't move," said Pearson. Pearson came into the cabin and shut the door. Saladin stood still in front of the bed. "Who are you?" asked Pearson. "And what are you doing in my cabin?" Saladin thought quickly. He had to say something. "Barkman sent me," he said. "I have a message for you." "You're telling lies," said Pearson. "There's something on the bed. Stand back." Saladin moved back, and Pearson saw the open box. "So, you've found the black cat," said Pearson. "You're a member of the Red Hand Gang." Pearson opened the door and looked out into the corridor. It was empty. "Put your hands behind your back and come out of the cabin," said Pearson. "Then walk slowly up the stairs to the top deck." Saladin came out of the cabin and Pearson followed him. Saladin walked slowly up the stairs. When they reached the top deck, Pearson spoke again. "Walk over to the rail." There was a rail round the side of the ship. Over the rail was the sea. The Syria had now passed through the Corinth Canal, and the ship was rolling from side to side. Saladin walked slowly forward towards the funnel. "Stop," said Pearson. "Turn round." Saladin turned and looked at Pearson. "Now, tell me the truth," said Pearson. "Who are you?" Saladin decided to tell some truth and some lies. "Barkman's dead," said Saladin. "And Yusuf is caught. The Baalbek gang is finished. The police are waiting for you at Venice." "I don't believe you," said Pearson. "How do you know this? Who are you?" "I'm an inspector in the Egyptian police," replied Saladin. "I've followed you from Beirut. The Italian police are waiting for you at Venice." "You're telling lies again," said Pearson. "Why didn't you bring the police onto the boat at Athens?" Saladin did not reply, and Pearson started to laugh. "You didn't tell anyone at Athens," he said. "There's no one waiting for this boat at Venice. Now I'm going to shoot you. I'll throw your body into the sea and no one will ever know." Suddenly, Pearson lifted his gun. At the same moment, a large wave shook the side of the ship. Pearson was thrown against the rail, and the gun fell onto the deck. For a second, both men looked at the gun, then at each other. The wind pressed hard against them. Neither of them moved forward. Pearson was the first to move. He tried to pick up the gun, and Saladin ran straight at him. He held Pearson round the neck and pushed him over the rail. Pearson fell backwards over the rail and disappeared into the angry sea below. There was a scream. Then there was silence. Saladin walked slowly away from the rail and sat down on the deck. No one came. Everyone was busy eating dinner. No one had heard the noise. Chapter 13. Do not disturb the corridor outside cabin. 22 was still empty. Everything was silent. Saladin went into the cabin and picked up the box carefully. Then he carried it across the corridor to his own cabin. He went back across the corridor once more. In every cabin there was a notice with the words, "Do not disturb," written on it in large letters. Saladin took this notice and hung it on the door of cabin 22. "The steward will see this on the door," thought Saladin to himself. "He'll think that Pearson is sick. No one will go into cabin 22 until Venice." He locked the door of cabin 22 and put the key on its hook in the steward's room. Then Saladin went back to his own cabin. The food was still on the table, but he was not hungry. He threw it out of the window. Saladin looked at his watch. He was surprised. It was only 8:45. A lot had happened in a short time. After a few minutes, there was a knock at the door. It was the steward. "I hope that you enjoyed your dinner, sir," he said to Saladin. "Thank you," replied Saladin. "I enjoyed it very much." "Mr. Pearson's put the 'Do not disturb' notice on his door," said the steward. "Perhaps he's sick. I'll not disturb him until Venice." "Yes," said Saladin. "I met him half an hour ago. He said that he felt sick. He'll not want anything until tomorrow." "When do you want breakfast, sir?" asked the steward. "I feel tired," replied Saladin. "Don't wake me in the morning. When I want breakfast, I'll call you." "Good night, then," said the steward. Saladin said good night and locked his door. He had not slept on a bed for many hours and he was very tired. He undressed and got into bed. At first, the movement of the boat kept him awake, but he was soon asleep and slept deeply all night. When Salahaddin woke up the next morning, the bright sun was shining into his cabin. He looked at his watch. It was nearly 11 o'clock. He rang the bell for the steward. "When do we arrive in Venice?" asked Salahaddin. "We're early today," replied the steward. "We'll be there in 2 hours, but you don't need to get off the boat immediately. You can have lunch first." "No, thank you," said Salahaddin. "I want to get off the boat as soon as possible. What about Mr. Pearson? Is he better?" "He still has the notice on his door," replied the steward. "I'll not disturb him until after lunch." "That's a good idea," said Salahaddin. "Now, can you bring me some coffee, please?" Salahaddin drank his coffee slowly and got dressed. He heard a lot of noise. The ship was arriving at Venice. Salahaddin looked out into the corridor. It was empty. The steward had gone to the dining room. Salahaddin picked up the heavy box and left the cabin. From the side of the boat, Salahaddin saw the tall buildings of Venice. They were passing in front of St. Mark's Cathedral. They were now near the docks. After half an hour, the boat was beside the dock. Salahaddin left the Syria while the other passengers were having lunch. "What's in that box?" asked a policeman. "Some books," replied Salahaddin. He did not want any trouble. The policeman did not ask Salahaddin to open the box. In a few minutes, Salahaddin was in a water taxi on his way to the railway station. Safe at last, thought Salahaddin. When they open cabin 22, they'll find it empty. They'll be very surprised. Chapter 14. Return to Cairo. Salahaddin took the first train from Venice to Rome. The next morning he was on a plane for Cairo. The plane was late, and he did not arrive until after 10 o'clock in the morning. The sun was high in the sky, and it was getting hotter and hotter. Salahaddin felt better. He preferred the heat of Cairo to the cold deck of the Syria. He took a taxi to his flat. There was a surprise waiting for him. Layla and Fuad were there. Fuad explained. "We arrived this morning from Beirut," he said. "We were worried about you. You didn't send a telegram. We thought that something had happened." "Of course," the telegram said, Salahaddin. "I forgot to send you a telegram. I'm really sorry." "We phoned the police here in Cairo," said Fuad. "No one knew anything about you. We were very worried." "It's my fault," said Salahaddin. He told them what had happened. They were happy that he was safe back in Cairo. "And this is the box," said Layla. "The black cat is in this box. Let's open it." Salahaddin opened the box and lifted out the black cat. "It doesn't look very valuable," said Layla. "I don't like it at all." "We don't know its value," said Salahaddin. "We'll take it to the Cairo Museum tomorrow." "Then you can have a holiday," said Layla. "You need a rest. Perhaps you'll show us round Cairo." "That won't be a rest," replied Salahaddin, "but it's a good idea." "I'm going to make coffee," said Layla. "Do you both want some?" "Yes, please," replied Salahaddin. "I want some coffee and I want your story, Fuad. What happened at Baalbek?" And Fuad told his story. I went to the Beirut police, Fuad began, and told them about Barkman's death. They asked a lot of questions. Police always ask a lot of questions, said Salahaddin. I told them about Pearson, continued Fuad, and I said that you had gone to Athens. Did they believe you? Not at first, replied Fuad. Then I told them about the black cat. I gave them Barkman's message. I told them about the cafe in Baalbek and about Yusuf. Then they believed me. And what happened next? Asked Salahaddin. The police asked me to help them, replied Fuad. It wasn't possible for a policeman to go into Yusuf's cafe. The people there knew all the policemen. Yusuf was a clever man. The police had to trick him, and they asked me to go to Baalbek. They wanted me to go into the cafe and give Yusuf the message from Barkman. I went to Baalbek in the evening, continued Fuad. I found Yusuf's cafe. It was near the ruins of the old city. I sat down and asked for coffee. Then I asked for Yusuf. I told Yusuf about Barkman's death. The police were waiting outside, Fuad continued. They were hiding in a car. I told Yusuf about the black cat and he thanked me. Then he hurried out of the cafe. And the police saw him? Asked Salahaddin. Yes, said Fuad. They watched him carefully. Where did Yusuf go? He got into a car, replied Fuad, and drove to a farm in the mountains. The police followed him. Then they hid in the hills round the farm and waited. How many men were at the farm? Salahaddin asked. The police didn't know, replied Fuad. They waited for more police. Then they shouted to the men at the farm and told them to come out. Didn't the men at the farm shoot at the police? No, they didn't, replied Fuad. There were only 3 of them at the farm. Barkman was dead and Pearson was on the Syria. The 3 men came out without shooting. The police took them away. They're now in prison. Did they catch the leader of the gang? Asked Salahaddin. Yusuf was the leader, replied Fuad. He's now in prison with the others. Yusuf's in prison, said Salahaddin. Barkman's dead and so is Pearson. That's the end of the Baalbek gang. And 3 of the Red Hand gang were killed in the black car, said Layla. That's true, said Salahaddin. We'll have no more trouble for some time. Chapter 15. The end. The next morning, Salahaddin went with Layla and Fuad to the Cairo Museum. They took the black cat with them. They met a friend called Faisal who worked in the museum. Salahaddin gave the black cat to Faisal and told him the story. It looks old, said Faisal, and perhaps it's valuable, but I don't know about the gold and diamonds. I'll have to look at it carefully. Salahaddin, Layla, and Fuad went and had some coffee. They came back to the museum about 2 hours later. Well, what's the answer? Asked Fuad. It's very old, replied Faisal, but it's not made of gold and there are no diamonds. The eyes and collar are made of stone. The cat is made of a heavy kind of wood. So it isn't valuable, said Layla. 7 men have died for a piece of wood. No, you're wrong, said Faisal. It's very, very valuable. It's more than 2,000 years old. The gold and diamonds aren't important. Perhaps there really was a gold cat, said Salahaddin. Perhaps tomb robbers stole the real cat thousands of years ago. Then they put this wooden cat into the tomb. We'll never know, said Fuad, but we're lucky to have this one. Yes, we are lucky, said Faisal. Can we have it for our museum? Of course you can, replied Salahuddin. This is the right place for it. Come back in November, said Faisal. Then you'll see the black cat in its right place. And we'll come back too, said Layla. Fuad's been working too hard. He needs a real holiday. We'll come back to Cairo for 2 weeks in November. That's a good idea, said Faisal. I'll see you all then. 6 months later, Salahuddin was sitting in his office. Summer was over and the weather was getting cool. The telephone rang. You remember your promise, don't you? Asked Faisal. My promise? To come to the museum, continued Faisal. The new room is going to be opened tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Oh, of course, said Salahuddin. I'll be there. The next morning, there was a crowd of people in the museum. Faisal met Salahuddin and took him to the new room. There was a large notice outside the door. The treasures of Anketan archaeologists had found the tomb of Anketan. Pearson's map had helped them. They had brought many things from the tomb to Cairo. They were all in this room. Ahmed was standing in the middle of the room. He was talking to Fuad and Layla. The taxi driver who had taken Barkman to Cairo station was there also. Salahuddin went over to say hello. Do you see what's behind me? Asked Ahmed. There, in the center of the room, was a large glass case. The black cat was inside. Underneath, there was a notice. The black cat of Ankutin, given by Salahuddin I Nur.